All right, thank you everyone for joining us today. This is the second meeting of the ad hoc committee considering a project on improving timeliness and agency adjudication. I'm Leah Robbins. I'm an attorney advisor here at ACUS, serving as staff counsel for this project. I'm again joined by my colleagues, Research Director Jeremy Grayboys and Attorney Advisor Jen Celine, who are the in-house researchers for the project, and Ray Lamone from the MSPB, who is chair of this ad hoc committee. So before turning it over to Ray to get things started, I need to take roll. So I will call two rolls. So first will be the names of committee members and their alternates. After each name is called, if you could please stay here so we can make sure your mics are working, that would be greatly appreciated. So Ray Lamone.
Here.
Thank you. Greg Baker. Kent Barnett.
I'm here. Thanks.
Thank you. Scott De La Vega. Claire Evans.
I'm here.
Thank you. Claire Green. Mike Lezaja. Nadine Mancini. She will probably be late. Patrick Nagel.
Present, thanks.
Thank you. Elizabeth Papez. Roxanne Rothschild.
I'm here.
Thank you. Kate Shaw. Cheryl Stanton.
Present.
Thank you. Channing Strother. And Melissa Wasserman. Okay. Is there any committee member present whose name I did not call? All right. So the second roll will be the names of ACUS members who are not on the committee and any alternates. After each name is called, again, if you could please stay here so we can make sure your mics are working, that'd be appreciated. I will not be calling the names of anybody from the public who does not have speaking privileges, meaning you should write in the chat if you would like to speak at any point during the meeting. Joe Solomey, alternate for Dan Cohen.
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you.
Matt Weiner.
I am here. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Lubbers.
Here.
Thank you. And Bill Funk.
I am here as well.
Awesome. All right. Thank you guys so much. Is there any other ACUS member present whose name I did not call? Oh, I think I see Nadine now. Are you here?
Here, I made it.
Awesome. Thank you, Nadine. Okay, cool. All right, Ray, well, I'll just turn it over to you to get started then.
All right. Thank you so much, Leah. I do have kind of the script that we kind of went through last time, just kind of highlight, as we kind of go through the speaking and the voting process. So a little bit of a reminder. Please note that only ACUS members, including government members, public members, senior fellows, liaison representatives, and special counsels, whether or not on the committee, and their designated alternatives have full speaking privileges. I will do my best to recognize you. You can either raise your hand through the feature to be recognized, to provide a comment, but I would ask folks to limit using the chat feature to put any type of substantive comments there. We should kind of just be able to speak things through. If at all possible, please keep your cameras on. It's always good to kind of see not only your wonderful faces, but to kind of continue the engagement of the discussion going back and forth. For all participants, please use, we already talked about the chat feature. So everybody will have voting with the exception of, is it the public, Jeremy, who are not voting members?
All members of the ad hoc committee can vote on the recommendation. I don't think we have any members of the public here today. So
That's what I wanted to check.
Yep.
Okay, great. So we're all going to vote. And again, I want to thank everybody who attended the initial meeting. We got a lot of good work done on the initial review. You'll see that updates have now been sent around, pulling in some of those comments. We have a couple more from Jeff, for instance, that came in that were just highlighted on today's version. So Leah, I think if we could just start from the top and start to work our way through the document one more time. Again, these are the recommendations. I think for folks that were just jumping on, I did ask Jen and Jeremy that on the broader report in which agencies who have yet to update the overall report with their background information on how they do adjudications. I think we're expecting to get those within a week or week and a half to kind of fully complement the entire report. So stay tuned for that as well. All right, so I think we could just kind of go through paragraph by paragraph. Again, we did make some changes from last go through, and I think we've captured those. And I think we could kind of just start going through the lines to see if anybody wanted to raise another question or a comment or a potential edit. I think that first one on line 7, is that something that we need to take up?
Yeah, I think that we should at least address it. I mean, to see if you have a problem with it or not. That was a comment submitted by Jeff, who is currently on the call, so maybe he wants to just weigh in a little bit about it.
Sure. I don't feel strongly about it, but I thought that the reader of this paragraph might not realize that the agencies aren't just deciding these questions, without any further action. And so I just threw in a little line about although judicial review of such decisions is normally available, just to indicate that since we don't mention that anyplace else.
No, I like it. I like that qualification as well. Is that something we put to, or have any other comments and then we do a vote? Is that right?
I guess we can see if anyone else has any concerns with it. If there's no concerns, I don't think you need a formal vote.
All right, not hearing any. I think we can, Ken.
Thanks. Right now, the way it's showing on the screen, I can't see it because it's got that control thing on it. The only thing I wondered was whether to just end the sentence with their cases, period, delayed adjudication, just to start a new sentence. Seemed a little more readable to me than all those clauses.
Yep, that's a nice break. Roxanne.
Yes, I don't want to make this overly complicated. So if what I'm saying starts to do that, then maybe I'll take it back. But I sort of look at it as the judicial review being available makes it even more important that the adjudication be timely, because basically with the sentence the way it was, which is members of the public depend on timely adjudication of their cases, period. I think that's good. And then we'd say delayed adjudication, especially when judicial review, especially given that just judicial review is normally available, can have significant consequences. Like maybe if we move it there, because the whole point is that not only do we need to be timely because we need to be timely, but you add in possible judicial review, and then you're talking about a really potentially huge timeline for people to get their disputes decided. I don't know if that makes it more too complicated. If not, if it does, I'll withdraw that.
I think you could shorten it by saying, especially given the availability of judicial review.
Yes, I think that makes sense. So then we'd have the initial sentence would just be that nice short, members of the public depend on timely adjudication of the cases, period. And then it goes into the next sentence.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was first looking at this, I was appreciating the distinction between kind of Article 3 and Article 2 in doing that. But I think your point about now bringing in the concept of timeliness, to kind of throw in the role of Article 3 as well. I think that's a nice addition. Yeah. All right, are we okay with that? Any comments on that? Okay, we'll keep moving. Thank you so much for that. Oh, Bill, you have a new comment or
A new comment.
okay?
And it's back, it's actually in the first sentence of the preamble.
Okay.
Because it's often said that justice delayed is justice denied. I mean, I actually never heard the expression administrative adjudication, that justice delayed is another, I've never heard it limited to that. And so I would suggest taking out of administrative adjudication, because it just reads right along and then says, it's indeed one rationale for administrative adjudication is because we want it to be timely. So I that's my suggestion.
Here, it's more punchy.
Yeah.
And more accurate.
Well, in that case, can we also say one rationale underlying the adjudication of many types of cases by executive branch agencies is that they can
And I think you can then get rid of the word the before executive branch.
yes.
Very punchy. I like that. All right, yeah, definitely stronger. Thank you. Are we good with that? Any other comments? Great. We'll kind of move on down. I think we're starting now at 11.
Yeah, this is another one of mine. So I suggested this because it's not just the volume of cases that are awaiting a final decision. It's a volume of cases that are anywhere in the pipeline, it seemed to me. Now, maybe pipeline's a little too colloquial, but that was the best way to
I was just about to ask if
make my
if it's not too colloquial, maybe we could say something like pending before the agency.
Yeah. That's fine with me.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Pat. Any more comments on that? Nadine?
I was fine with that. I was going to move to another line in this paragraph.
Let's do that. You have the floor.
I just didn't know, and this might again be committee on style issue, is line 14 where we say many factors can affect these variables. And then it felt to me like it should be like a, for instance, funds appropriated, but I wasn't sure if that was kind of what was meant to be said there. And then line 15, we say other factors. So it's kind of like listing those factors that can affect the variables. So I didn't know if a for instance worked there. That was my only.
So that was based on a discussion at the last committee meeting.
Okay.
It was the strong sense of the committee that we wanted to emphasize funds being especially important. And this, I mean, this might not be the right way to do it, but that's why it's structured as it currently is.
Thank you.
Well, if you just said, for example, funds, that would still highlight it. I mean.
Yeah.
would it?
Yep.
It's true. Yeah,
Or you emphasize it by saying many factors can affect these variables, particularly given that fund, I don't know, or something, you could try to like give it some flashy, look at this is important. Committee on Style, it just the flow seemed weird there.
Roxanne, do you have a suggestion?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I like Nadine's point. I would just leave many factors can affect these variables, period, and then just start the next sentence with, for example. But again, as Nadine said, it could just be the Committee on Style taking a look at this. The proverbial Committee on Style.
Yeah,
I
let's do,
just add, it just seemed like a weird disconnect to me to say many factors, and then you have a line about funds, and then you say other factors. It just didn't seem to kind of connect. That's it, flow.
Need a transition.
Yeah, something.
yeah. I think we agree on that. All right, Bill, back to you.
Yeah, I have something on lines 18 and 19
Okay,
where it says when such factors arise. And I mean, these factors are always present, so it's just not the right way to introduce it. And I would suggest maybe when these factors increase caseloads and delays or backlogs result, comma, agencies frequently face pressure. Increase caseloads and delays or backlogs result. Yeah.
But
but
they might not increase caseloads. They might, like, the caseloads could be the same, but delays or backlogs result because of, say, disruption in agency operations.
Okay, take out and, leave in or. And I'd leave it to the Committee on Style if they don't think this is quite the best way to say it, but it was just something wrong by saying the factors arise.
Something like when these factors increase caseloads or result in delays or backlogs.
yeah, that looks a little cleaner. Roxanne?
Yeah, maybe we can simplify that sentence because really caseloads are a cause and delays and backlogs logs are the symptom we're trying to get at. So we could simply say when delays or backlogs increase, comma, agencies frequently face pressure, because caseload increase might cause the delay or might cause the backlog. But the thing we're concerned about are the delays and the backlogs. So we could just cut it to just talking about that. For whatever reason, we have delays or backlogs. That's when we've got pressure and we need to do something about it. Or do something to prevent it from happening.
All right, does that look right now? Trying to follow all this. When delays or backlogs increase, agencies, I see, okay, yep. A little shorter there. Any other comments on this? I think that does capture the sentiment of what we're trying to say here. All right, let's go ahead and adopt it and keep on moving. Okay, Nadine.
Thank you. I had, just again, this is maybe a style question. This is lines 28 through forever. There's just a really long list there, and I didn't know if it might be helpful to bullet it. I don't know if that's something, I don't know that I've seen that in preambles. Maybe we've not done that. It's just a super long, like, you know, you're trying to get through it and you're like, is this sentence ever going to end? It's great stuff. I'm not saying that, but I just didn't know if maybe a list would really be punchier. That was my only suggestion.
Well, I think ACUS is trying to make the point that we've studied this issue a lot of times, so we want people to do something about it. But I think that was when I first looked at this, you know, the initial draft. I think, yeah, ACUS was definitely being very deliberative and letting them know we've looked at these issues for a long time, and we're kind of reminding the reader they should also go back and read some of their prior reports. Whether or not this is the right kind of flow, I think that's certainly debatable.
Channeling high in terms of implementation. I just thought that an agency reader might just skip their eye might just try to skip to the end, and I don't know, maybe they'd look at the footnotes. Maybe that's
The footnote numbers help. It's almost like you've numbered them.
Yeah. Roxanne?
I am a big fan of bullet pointed lists, so I will second Nadine's suggestion that if it's okay to do it in a preamble, I think it'd be nice, because then each one is, here's a list, and then it's got its little footnote that tells us where I can go and look for more information about it.
I think that would help with readability. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so yep, we have instructions for the committee to go look at that. Thank you. And I think it's starting fresh at 38. Just pause. Oh, Nadine.
something that's probably already on Jeremy and Leah's radar is the new EO that the administration just issued on artificial intelligence, and whether you might want to include that in the footnote. That was it.
Great point. Very timely.
It's possible it come up at the plenary, right? I mean, someone might want to, yeah.
Yeah, I know Scott De La Vega's not with us, but in the last meeting, he definitely flagged that, you know, on his detail to the White House, that there's a big push to make sure that folks are very focused on artificial intelligence as well. So updating that is very timely. All right, we'll keep on scrolling. Okay, let's see, maybe at 47 before we get to the recommendations. Anything else on this laundry list? No, we spent a little bit of time at our last meeting going over that. And the edits were accepted, so I think we're good there. All right, now we're kind of in the throes of the recommendations. And Jeff had an addition.
It's really just style. I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't like using, you know, Freedom of Information Act and requested media as an adjective. So agencies should be mindful of what kinds of data are most requested, or maybe most frequently requested by media or in Freedom of Information Act requests.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. Yeah, we're not necessarily putting a bullseye on FOIAs, but we also know that there are going to be many users of this data. So as agencies are, you know, putting their, you know, their plans in place and coming up with the specifications of what they would like to see in a new system, they should be mindful of the different users of that data. That could be, you know, part of an organization like our FOIA friends, who always seem to be putting out calls to agency offices for information. And so if this information is already being collected, then that kind of helps with that process. But there are many uses of that data.
I think they can prepare for the requests because they've seen them before.
Right. Nadine?
I was just going to chime in and say thanks to Jeff because I had that sentence flagged as well. I couldn't quite figure out a good fix, but this seems great.
Yep.
Do you want to say most frequently sought so as not to use request twice in the same sentence?
Yep. That reads a lot better. Thank you.
Good. Would it be better to start the sentence with to ensure timely responses as appropriate, comma, agency should be mindful?
Can you say that one more time, Bill?
It's to take the to ensure timely responses as appropriate and put at the beginning of the sentence.
I see what, okay.
I just thought it read that.
Do you want to limit it to the media? I mean, obviously there's other types of requesters, such as, I don't know, perhaps academics on this call. Certainly researchers are another category of people who frequently request these data.
Yeah, I don't think it's supposed to be an exhaustive list, just, adding a few examples here. But maybe adding, knowing that ACUS is also mindful of its academic partners, that using that as one of our examples seems to be a win-win as well. But it could be a very exhaustive list too. So I think maybe, 3 examples.
You could put the Freedom of Information Act request before and then say by media or researchers. Or so then sought by media or researchers and
Right.
yeah.
Right. Now, that's notwithstanding, of course, congressionals and, all those other types of request agencies get from, the Hill on data asks as well. Nadine?
Still needs to be fixed a little bit. So are most frequently okay. No.
Is that how you want it? The red line is.
I guess that's okay.
Okay.
Go to Nadine.
Thanks. I'll just chime in as an agency FOIA person that it's really, I guess data could be, it's records, right? FOIA is about records. So obviously this section's about collecting data and information and not necessarily generating records, which I realize can also be electronic. So I just wanted to flag that as whether data is the right word there, and then whether this belongs in this recommendation, and maybe it's kind of a separate point. I don't know. It's kind of, we're trying to tell agencies, be careful about, or thoughtful about the information that you're collecting, when FOIA is really about what records you're creating that may be based on that data, right?
I do think, data we are looking at in the most general sense, which could be inclusive, I think, of records and information. That idea about transparency.
Well, I think we need to keep data in there because that's what we're talking about in this first recommendation. And to Nadine's point, it seems like yes, the requests are for the records, but when you're searching for the information, you have to kind of know what data would be responsive.
Yeah, I'll just add too that, a frequent refrain I hear from a lot of my FOIA attorneys is we don't have to create a record, right? So it's either a record or it's not. And so the fact that there may be data from which you can create a record doesn't necessarily fall within FOIA, but I'll stop. There's other people here that have, Roxanne probably has a good thought here.
Yeah, Roxanne?
What if we just say data or records? I know, I understand what Nadine's saying. You're right, we don't have to create records where we don't have it, but because we often get data requests, we have proactively started just providing a bunch of stuff on our website that maybe we weren't required to, but at least cuts down on all the requests. So, so I see what you're saying, but maybe we could just say data or records.
Yeah, there's a provision in the Act that says, in making any record available to a person, an agency shall provide the record in any form or format requested by the person if the record is readily reproducible by the agency in that form or format. They should make reasonable efforts to maintain its records in forms or format that are reproducible for purposes of this section. So it's kind of saying you don't have to create new records, but you might have to give the information in a format that the requester wants.
Yeah, that's typically like by email. We used to actually, back in the day, Jeff, we'd copy paper and we'd send paper in the mail. And sometimes now people are saying, well, I want it in a PDF format, or I want it in, some kind of searchable, a searchable format. So I think that really goes more to that. I mean, agencies have tons of data, but we don't always have records that correlate with that data.
Hey, Bill?
If you have an Excel spreadsheet that has a lot of data on it, and the request is for some of that data, you have to kind of.
That's a record. That would be a record.
Yeah, that's what I thought. The sentence in one says you collect data. Once you've collected data, that's the record. The collection of that data is a record. So I agree. You don't have to create records, but once you've collected the data in any form, that's a record. So I think I don't care about data or records. That's fine, but I don't think you can get around showing this stuff just because it's data. I mean, data is a record.
I'm thinking of ECMS systems, or all kinds of ways to gather data, but it's not necessarily in form of a record. So yeah, I would vote for Roxanne's solution. I'll leave it there.
Jennifer? Jen?
Yeah, at the beginning of the discussion, Nadine, you said maybe potentially it doesn't feel like it fits here. And then thinking about Roxanne's comment about proactive disclosure, we could move this sentence down to 27, which talks about proactive disclosure, or that section is about communication. And so we could move it there if that would make you more comfortable, or the.
And it may fit better there. Is there a way we could just, Leah, can we move to that section, just kind of see what that section already looks like? All right, yeah. Yeah, I think in some ways, it's part of that laundry list of things that people should be thinking about when you're designing these case management systems, but maybe having it up so front up detracts from some of the general sentiment that we're trying to say at the beginning. So that may be a good fix. Thoughts, ideas on that? Do people feel better that this maybe?
I thought I thought that having it in one made sense because it was really more about collection and rather than disclosing it. It's not a question of the sentence we're talking about isn't disclosure. It is about collection and identifying. At least that's the way I wrote it.
Right, right. And there's certainly no reason why it couldn't be in both places. And I'll give an example where I thought this was useful, even though it wasn't necessarily in the adjudication realm, but when I was at Interior, especially coming out of the National Park Service's issues with harassment cases, we were constantly getting data calls from the media and even FOIAs on, how many cases are being brought forth on harassment issues. And I would have to do a data call to 10 different bureaus, wait for it, and then we're always pushing up against, say, the FOIA or other deadlines to get that information out. So we designed a universal case management tool in which all the bureaus fed information in, and we were mindful of, now that we're able to collect this information, we were able to respond to the media requests, to Congress, to FOIAs much faster and within the statutory timeframes than had we continued to do it piecemeal, bureau by bureau. So I think that was just kind of one of the considerations that we're trying to be reminding agencies of. If you are updating or building a new case management tool, be thoughtful of how you're going to be able to use that data, perhaps even in the context bigger than maybe just adjudication itself as well. So I think there's applicability to have it here as well. And then in the other part of the memo report. Roxanne.
So maybe we leave the language here where it is, but change it ever so slightly. Like if we say, to ensure timely responses are appropriate, agencies should be mindful of collecting the kinds of data. So collecting the instead of what. So mindful of collecting the kinds of data or records that are most frequently sought. I mean, maybe that just, I think it's a nice statement to have up front, because the whole point is that, think about what people want when you're trying to figure out how you're going to collect things.
Nadine?
Jeremy's been waiting a while.
Okay,
Want to
all
go
right,
first, Jeremy?
All right, let's go to
Sure, I
Jeremy.
can go first. I was going to say, Ray, I mean, to your point, I think you raised a really good point. Maybe the issue is more about not just the data you're collecting, but make sure that you're building in reports in a way that are actually usable to certain people, making those reports accessible to certain people. Is that sort of what you're getting at in be mindful of collecting the kinds of data records that are most frequently sought, is saying that, okay, a comms office can click a button and generate a report very quickly of certain critical data?
Yeah, I think that's the idea about kind of flattening an organization's data access, and these are very powerful tools. And even though, yes, we are in adjudications and we might make sure our judges and the clerk's office and the attorneys handling these cases, there could be greater utility as well for minimum investment, since we're already making these investments. So I think that's kind of the concept here, but if that's too broad, I think we could talk about that.
So maybe it's something less agencies should be mindful of collecting the kinds of data, because it sounds like they're collecting the data, at least as we frame the first sentence. It's more about agencies should, we can finesse this on the committee on style, but structure reports and make them available to relevant personnel so that agencies can respond in a timely manner to FOIA requesters.
Well, again, just, and also broader than FOIA too, media, congressional inquiries, things like that, yeah. Or, sought by critical stakeholders, including, Congress, the media, and FOIA requesters. Yeah, and maybe we could leave it to the style committee to kind of maybe clean that up if it needs to be cleaned up a little bit. I think that's the sentiment. So maybe now we go back to Nadine.
Thank you. No, I was just going to say greater minds go before me. Both you and Jeremy have. This is exactly what I was thinking when you were speaking about,
Okay.
My harping on FOIA being about records, but that doesn't mean we don't get other requests for information or data from other sources. And so I think you've covered that here. This is great.
Okay, great. Roxanne?
I was thinking, what if we just flip this around? Because I think the whole idea is we're trying to say, making sure that we're identifying the data that everybody wants. So maybe we say agencies should, oh, I'm sorry to make you retype. Agencies should identify, then it says the kinds of data or records that are most frequently sought by critical stakeholders. Sorry, didn't mean to make you retype everything. Including requesters, comma, and get rid of the to ensure timely, copy and get rid of to ensure timely responses. Cut that out just for a second. And so then it would go straight to and structure reports and make them available to relevant personnel, and then put the so that, and then say to ensure timely responses as appropriate. Because that way we get across the idea, which is think about what people are asking for. So identify that. Build your reports, make them available to people who need them. And
Right.
could we look at it just for a second without the markup? Just so it's easier to read. Yeah, I mean, that works to me, but you can go back to showing the markup again. Thanks for letting us read it.
And it may even sound okay by putting a period, even after FOIA requesters, structural reports. I think that's kind of maybe also will just be the result of it. I'm not sure we necessarily need that, because of course the data would be, we're mindful of who the audience is, and so they would be getting that information regardless. And then it goes right into, at a minimum, now we're kind of focusing more on the adjudication process. So I know Jeremy suggested that, but now I'm thinking, well, maybe is it needed?
I have the same problem, which is I don't know what reports you're talking about. I mean, we haven't mentioned reports before, and all of a sudden we're sending reports, and I just didn't seem to flow.
We can play with it, but by report, I mean, lots of ECMSs have I can run a report, which will generate a spreadsheet of me of critical data. I mean, that's what I mean by a report. That's a pretty frequent feature in CMSs.
Well, how about we leave it like this, Jeremy, if that's okay, with the
Absolutely.
comment that the Committee on Style could take a look at it? Right. Right now, we're going through kind of look at the specs of some of these systems that they should include this kind of information data, if you will, captures. I don't think we had a lot of discussion at our last meeting on that. So I'll just kind of pause. Bill, did you want to?
Well, I have something on C.
Okay,
If A and B are okay with everybody. My question with C was, I didn't understand how for a pending case, the agency could tell how many days are required to conclude it. So it says for each pending case, the number of days required to conclude it. And I don't know how an agency would do that. So that was one issue. And then the other issue was, I just didn't understand what the number for each pending completed case, the number of days required to conclude the case and meet other critical case processing milestones system-wide, and I didn't understand that. It just was too much for me to understand.
I'm thinking that's kind of anticipating metrics and the process to be able to count that, but that's my presumption when I read this.
Well, you see, I thought meet other critical case processing milestones probably related to the pending cases. In other words,
right,
as opposed to the completed cases. But I still didn't know if the agency was supposed to track this information. The number of days required to meet critical case processing milestones system-wide and at each level, and with each level, their adjudication systems. It was Jeremy, I mean, I assume that you had something to do with writing this, so maybe
Yeah,
you
I
can
mean,
help us out.
we were trying to capture the idea. There's lots of adjudication is not necessarily a simple process. It can move through different people. It can move through different stages, initials, hearing, even at the hearing level can go through pre-hearing, hearing, and post-hearing phases. The idea is figuring out what those critical milestones are that you should be tracking and determining how long it actually takes to go through each of those stages, which is how you essentially identify where you have bottlenecks. You know, it's not very useful to say I have a bottleneck at the hearing level. It's a lot more useful to say I have a bottleneck in the decision writing process at such and such hearing office. And the way you do that is by capturing holistic data.
Okay, but we haven't asked them to identify the critical case processing milestones, have we?
No, I mean, this was.
I mean, if we want them to track that,
Sure.
Don't we want them to identify what the critical case processing milestones are? I mean, and that seems like something that is separate from this subset. I mean, this says to track these things, but we haven't had them identify them in the first place.
We might have done that in another recommendation.
Maybe. I don't recall it, but it may be. It would seem to me information collection would come under information collection as a separate thing, which is one of the things you should collect is what are the critical case processing milestones.
In the preamble, we say as one of the listed numbers, the development of reasonable time limits or step-by-step time goals for agency action. Footnote to recommendation 86.7. So we're mentioning these step-by-step time goals, which is another way of saying milestones.
Oh, I see other recommendations, other former ACUS recommendations. Well, I defer to others. I just say that, if I were reading this without having read all those other recommendations by ACUS, I would have, this would be telling me to track something that I don't even know that I have.
I think we meant it to be implicit in basically tracking case milestones. You obviously have to identify them. I think it's difficult to identify with any specificity in a recommendation of this generality what those milestones are, because they will vary tremendously from program to program. I mean, I think that has to be an agency by agency thing, but I think if you wanted to say something like identify those critical case milestones somewhere, that could be made more explicit.
That's, I think so. I mean, that's what I was suggesting. I wasn't suggesting you'd actually, that you would identify, that the agency should identify.
Right.
And are we clear that this is just for completed cases?
I would imagine it should also include pending. If an agency wanted to kind of capture real-time adjudications and saying that,
That's in B. Look in B. I mean, that's the pending case. We could say, move something up there. The current status of each pending and current status and what.
I think we can do it in C. I was going to suggest that we, for C, get rid of pending and completed. Just say for each case, because a case is either pending or completed. So for each case, the number of days required to, and then cut out, starting with the word conclude, until you get to the word meet. And then get rid of the word other. And then start with the word system-wide, get rid of the word system-wide and delete all the way to start of the word each on the next line. No, the next each, sorry. I realized it was. So delete all the way to until you get to each level of their adjudication systems. So basically what you're saying is for each case, the number of days required to meet critical case processing milestones at each level of their adjudication systems. That would include completion, that would include a hearing, that would include, issuance of a complaint or whatever your critical milestones are, that you should report on it.
Yeah.
And so that, to your point, Jeffrey, about it should include pending. Certainly, if you've got a pending case, how long did it take to get the hearing held? How long did it take to get, even though it's still pending, we want to know how long did it take to do all these things up until where it's currently at.
Right. Yeah, I like that. And I also like the fact that we're not being so granular as to say, in every part of the agency or whatever we said. That seemed to be too much.
Let's go to Jennifer.
I just wanted to say one of the reasons that we included not just every level of the agency, but within levels, is because often that's where the problem is. It could be that one particular office is functioning very well, but at that same level of the hierarchical structure, you have another office that is really causing the backlog. And so if you're not looking at each office that's involved in the adjudicative process, you might be missing where the problem is. So that was the discussion behind adding that really clunky language.
But don't forget, we say at a minimum.
But what if we also, instead of the word each, we say all? And then I think level would have to become a plural, but so the point being, to your point, Jennifer, that we're saying, I mean, an agency can identify their critical case processing milestones, and there may be multiple case processing milestones within each level. It's just that we want to have it from the beginning to the end, the whole life cycle of the case.
Jen, you're saying within each organizational subunit too. For example, separate hearing offices or separate field offices where you might see geographic variation in timeliness. So, the Boston hearing office might be doing a great job, but we're seeing backlogs in the Cleveland hearing office.
But since you're doing it for each case, you're going to figure that out.
I just feel like we need to get Jennifer back on for a second. Does this language kind of capture the sentiment?
Yeah, I'll defer to the committee. It was just that a lot of the issue that we saw in the case studies is that agencies weren't cognizant of the fact that there was variation.
Oh, got it.
Within the same level. And so one of the things we wanted to draw attention to was the fact that there are these differences and that they can be obscured when you look at aggregate data.
And then who gets access to that? But that's another part of the report. Chief Judge Nagel, you've been patient.
So we just spent a couple $100 million on a case processing system that I don't think will do this to the specificity that you're requesting. So we're looking at about 2038 before we can join this recommendation, I'm guessing. We have about 120,000 cases a day that move status. And we do keep track of the age of cases in various places and a lot of other factors that I think contribute to, our eye on making sure that we're meeting certain milestones. But we also have like 30 some case processing levels for each case that they can possibly go through at any one time. And sometimes they go back and forth between various levels. We also transfer cases from different parts of the country. So a case that may have originated in Boston could be held by video in New Mexico. So when we look at individual office performance, the office performance of New Mexico is taking into account their work on that case from Boston. And the Boston office is no longer responsible for that case. So there are a lot of nuances to this that I think can get tricky when I would have to have someone from our systems team actually look at this to tell you whether, what percentage of this we could actually do. I think we actually do a pretty good job overall, if I may say so myself, of tracking our cases. It's just that the case tracking process itself is extraordinarily complicated in the volume of cases, the movement of cases, both geographically and within our system. And we have measures in place to make sure cases don't get, I guess, colloquially you'd say stuck or ignored or lost or missed. But tracking it with this level of specificity would be difficult for us, at any one point in time.
Absolutely. And I think that's how an agency would have that license to determine what is a milestone. It could arguably be as broad as from the time it's filed to the time it's decided, and that's one milestone. Just again, depending on the type of adjudications that are taking place. But yeah, I totally get that point. The number of cases that you're doing and how they move across, extremely complicated. Jeff?
Yeah, I was about to say that maybe Social Security has the wherewithal to do this, but some of the other agencies wouldn't. But I'm just concerned that we're just being maybe a little bit too
Prescriptive?
no, not prescriptive, but too ambitious. Or the agencies that receive this are going to say, "No, we can't. This is." I think we've improved it. It's not quite as language is better now, but I don't like at a minimum agencies should ensure all these things, because at a minimum sounds like, oh, this is the bare bones of what you should be doing, and it's a pretty big ask. So, this may be, I don't want to say agencies should consider, but I think we ought to maybe rethink the opening language here. Agencies should seek to ensure or something, and take out at a minimum, but make it less scary for the agencies.
But more than aspirational.
Yeah.
Roxanne's going to give us the right word.
But Jeff,
Yeah.
are A and B not something that every agency should have?
Well, and that's what I was gonna say, Bill, is I think
I
I'm
was
gonna
thinking
play
of C.
devil's advocate and say you have to have that. You can't report on aggregates unless you have the individual case data. And so
Maybe we should put the seek to ensure in C then. You could leave, it's C what I'm really most concerned about.
you can't report on, Jennifer had said, sometimes the problem is they just report on aggregates, but you can't even have that aggregate reporting unless you have the individual case data. And so you do need all of this. And I don't think it's too big of an ask. And I think, Raymond made the really good point, which is that each agency is going to have to decide what their own, critical milestones are. And so, Patrick, for your agency, you're going to have to decide what milestones are important to you or that make sense for how you process cases. But at the end of the day, you need to know for each case, how long did it take to get from point A to point B and then from point B to point C? Because if you can't tell that data, you can't report on anything. That would be my point.
Well, what if we take out at a minimum?
I think it's a minimum.
You think it's a minimum?
I think it's a minimum, but I'm not going to.
But the board is
I am
probably,
not go about saying we have to stay at a minimum.
the board is probably better equipped to do this than most agencies.
Yes. So I'm fine with taking out at a minimum because then we're just saying agencies should ensure that you can track the following. So I don't have a problem with that. Didn't Francis Perkins say that we should run government by numbers? If we don't have numbers, we don't know what's going on.
Well, I continue to think that A and B are something that I can't imagine an agency wouldn't have those. C is the one that's sort of up in the air because we're sort of deferring to the agency to decide what a critical case processing milestone is. And then the question is, what does at all levels mean? Does it mean just trial, appellate, something or other that is hierarchical, or can it be also the fact you have different field offices? And how does that play in? And that's where it gets tricky, right? And that's the one that maybe that should be not at a minimum, but should be a hortatory exercise to do as much as you can.
Jeremy?
I mean, so what if you say it's still vague, but critical case processing milestones within and across levels of their adjudication systems? I mean, it still leaves it to agencies to determine for themselves what that actually means in practice, but I think it at least hints at the issue here, which is
About different levels.
yeah.
Yep, and just kind of channeling Jennifer a little bit earlier, the idea is to kind of get a little bit more granular data to allow an agency to properly evaluate the process and then identify those chokeholds and then throw resources against it. So I think this idea about C is kind of forcing agencies to be critical in how much they can pull in to identify, the steps and where the hangups are, the bottlenecks are. Nadine?
I was just going to put in my vote for this latest language. I think I would like to think, and Jen can speak for herself, obviously, that the within and across really captures what she was looking for. And then I would just make a pitch that to the extent possible, if we could use the same language in A somehow, rather than at each level and within, I know she conceded that's kind of awkward language. So maybe this is the brilliant fix. Thanks, Jeremy.
That was a really good discussion. All right, thanks everyone. Okay, that was recommendation number 1. We're heading to number 2. Oh, I see some changes coming up. I can't tell that comment, Leah, the one on the right. Was that advanced by?
Yeah, that's just a
Oh,
note.
that's what we just did. I'm sorry. Okay. Should we go to? I was going to say performance goals, but Nadine.
On 2, sorry to stop the train here. It should also in line 78. Because we're talking about communication, not data collection. So I think also needs to come out.
Okay.
And the only other question I had, I know what it means, but I didn't know if we could be more precise about open channels. But I guess the idea is maybe it's opportunities, and then we're going to list what those possibilities are in A through E. And just open channels just seemed a little vague to me, but I mean, the idea is we want to give people the opportunity, and here's how you could do it through surveys, through listening sessions.
I'm not sure ombuds is a method.
And I was also going to suggest the may, maybe, include, methods include. I'm not sure. I mean, the may is the idea that they may use any of these, but they know that. But I hadn't thought about whether an ombuds is a method.
I think you appointing an
You could-
ombuds something or other would be a method, maybe.
Just what
Or-
use of ombuds, which is, I mean, we have our previous recommendation, use of ombuds in federal agencies.
Use of, yeah.
All right.
Just one thing I'll add on open channels, and that may not, and ongoing basis might get to it here. One thing we heard from stakeholders outside of agencies is they weren't really happy with sometimes agencies would wait until there was a problem and say, okay, tell us what you think now. The idea was actually building partnerships so that you'd have a sort of ongoing dialogue. Although I think ongoing basis probably gets to that. And we have a later recommendation about building partnerships, which may get to that open channel idea as well.
What if you move that up? Opportunities on an ongoing basis, or is that too awkward? Just to emphasize it, if
Yeah.
that's.
Or just ongoing opportunities.
Ah.
All right. Those edits look good. All right, we're going to move to performance goals.
I have a comment on 3.
Go ahead, Jeff.
The new language sounds like if Congress decides that statutory time limits on agency adjudication generally are beneficial, but I think we're talking about particular agencies or particular agency adjudication programs or something like that. And so I think we need to make it a little more specific somehow.
Or mandated. I mean, is it beneficial that you're
on
Beneficial for particular agent, for a particular agency.
yeah,
Time limits for adjudication by an agency, by a particular agency.
by a particular agency, yeah. On adjudication by a particular agency.
okay.
Yes.
Right, any other, oh, Roxanne.
Would it make sense to move section 3 to the end of the performance goals and standards section? Because then we would be saying, agencies, you should set your own goals, and you should, and here's all the things about setting your own goals. And so then at the end of the performance goals standards, then we have a section of, yeah, and if you don't do it, Congress might. In other words, so if Congress does it, they should seek input and blah, 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 blah. What makes sense to put it in that order so that we have the agencies doing their own thing first, and then at the end, what if Congress gets involved?
I like that.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Any other thoughts on that? Because I think that is kind of a big substantive move, but I just want to make sure we're all in agreement on that. Nadine?
I think that's a great idea. I also just had a question about the language on 91 to 92. It should seek testimony from the agency and its stakeholders for adopting, or I mean, I had to read it a couple times to understand who was, obviously it's Congress is going to adopt the reasonable time limits. But I think the idea is you want Congress, if they're going to make this move and impose these limits, please hear from the agency first and the stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
And then use that information to inform the adoption of reasonable time limits. I just thought it needed a little more connective tissue there.
Maybe they should hear from the agency before deciding whether or not to
Yeah, well,
adopt
there's
one
that too. Yeah. I mean, I think the version we had before teased that out a little bit. I thought the idea was to discourage Congress from imposing time limits. And I had proposed some language there, but if it was changed, that was fine. I thought that the idea was we want to discourage Congress from doing it, but only do it if they felt that they really had to, and if they had to take into consideration certain things. But that as in a first instance, we'd like them to let the agencies do it. And maybe that's solved a little bit by what Roxanne has wisely suggested, is that we lead with that. We want agencies to do this on their own before Congress has to tell you to do it. Anyhow, I just thought that was a little, just to tease out that language a little bit more. Seek testimony from the agency and the stakeholders before.
Before adopting reasonable time limits.
Yeah, or something to that effect.
Yeah, let's try that before adopting.
If Congress is considering imposing a statutory time limit, et cetera.
If Congress is considering statutory time limits, Jeff, is that what you're saying?
Imposing a statutory time limit on adjudication by a particular agency. Congress is considering imposing a statutory time limit, because if Nadine's right, and we originally wanted to, discourage or make them think about it more, then.
Would it be helpful to have the original language? I can type it in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
What if we also changed the word beneficial to necessary?
Yeah.
And we could take out the parentheses around or warranted. It would just be necessary or warranted. That also helps imply that don't just do this willy-nilly, do it if you think you need to. Oh, I'd leave or warranted. I just meant take out the parentheses around it. So it just says necessary or warranted. You could tell it gives me a little bit of the heebie-jeebies.
Well,
I think the word are would have to be is too, sorry. Is considering composing on blah, blah, blah is necessary or warranted.
considering that imposing?
Or would it be whether?
How about just if Congress considers imposing statutory time
Then I guess is before necessary because as.
Well, now we're, okay, that, I like the opening, but now we're at the end.
Has everybody seen the language in the chat that Jen posted?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was your initial proposal, Nadine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And there is one idea that's in the language in the chat that is not here now. And I think that was Jen and I's original recommendation, which was actually from an earlier ACUS recommendation, which one step before just imposing deadlines is say, why don't we let the agency set their own deadlines? That you might require by statute without actually setting deadlines. I think that's important.
Yeah, that's lost, I think, in what we have now. And I think that was in the, before I proposed this language, that concept was in the original draft. It's
Yeah.
I like
I
Jennifer's.
actually like, I'll just speak, I'm sorry, I'm speaking out of turn, but I like the idea of really maybe encouraging Congress to take a pause and really think about it before they, just, yeah.
So Jennifer's original language is closer to that, isn't it?
Now, this is my language
Oh,
from
the one
last,
you put in the chat?
Jennifer posted it because it was in the draft the last
Oh,
time.
okay, I think that's, yeah, I like
Yeah,
that.
so in the last meeting, that is what Nadine proposed.
Well, I would support it.
I do as well. Sorry, I wasn't.
Full
at the last
disclosure, I
meeting.
did switch the two sentences because I thought the order was better this way than so, but yeah.
Hi, Jen. I appreciate the full disclosure. It's fine. It's great.
So do we want to go back to the original language or Nadine's language, I mean?
I think we should.
Well, I'm not I think we had a big discussion, or maybe we didn't, but that idea about us determining, like Congress, telling the Congress that you shouldn't do this if the benefits such limits outweigh the costs. Because Congress is already making those calculations with or without ACUS's recommendations. And so it sounded like it was a little wishful thinking to imply that Congress doesn't understand the cost benefit analysis. I think that was the only thing that I think that brought a little bit of us wagging the finger at Congress that it may not be interpreted in the way that we want it to be interpreted. So
I think that was in the original draft, the
Okay.
cost benefit, which is why when I proposed this language, I
Right.
retained it. But if it's the committee's concern that doesn't fit, then we should talk about that. I mean, the original language was Congress should not impose statutory time limits
right.
unless the benefits clearly outweigh the costs of doing so. So
Yeah, and
we
we
have
did,
that in the original.
yeah. And in the last meeting, we softened that by kind of
With the language that I suggested, yeah.
right. If
But it retained that concept of cost benefit, but if there's concerns about that, I hear what you're saying, Ray, that
yeah, because
that-
I don't know. I'm now being cynical in my old age. They could care less about cost benefit. They're there to issue a press release and damn the torpedoes.
but perhaps there's room to blend what's here now, which is, I think I heard some people speaking in favor of this idea that they should talk to, maybe it was Jeff, that they should talk to the agencies.
Yeah.
So maybe it should do so only after. And maybe that's where, instead of saying cost benefit, we say something there about,
Without first talking to the agency.
yeah.
Well, I mean, why not have the first, what we have under 3 now as the lead-in? If they consider it, right, then they should talk to the agency first, right? Then the next sentence would be what's in the blurb here. If Congress decides to impose statutory time limits, so it should do so only blah, blah, blah. And I sort of like, say, they should consider the costs and benefits. Maybe they won't, but it's our recommendation that they ought to. Could that be good government? And then finally, if they decide are beneficial, it should require the agency. It should either, and that's the thing, it should either, that should be an alternative to Congress making the statutory time limit. They should say the agency should set the time limit. And then we would have A, B, and C. What if Congress actually adopts a time limit, what it should do. So those are 3 steps there. Consider doing it. If you decide you need some sort of time limit, let the agency do it. 3, or if you don't like that, you gotta do it yourself, then here's what you have to do.
Yeah, the A, B, and C follows from that, right, Bill? If they decide to do it themselves, if Congress wants to impose it themselves, just keep all this in mind, yeah.
Yeah, and then it wouldn't be in its assessment, Congress should. It would be like in setting any statutory time limit, Congress should. And then there's a problem with B when we get to it.
And if we go with this language, I would still change the word beneficial to necessary.
Sounds good. Take out the parentheses.
Do we need as necessary or warranted in the second line now?
Yeah, we could take that out. Wait,
Take it out in the first line or the second line?
Second line.
81.
yeah, take it out there. There, they're just deciding they want to proceed, and so we're saying talk to the agency, and later they're deciding what to do.
We got this language, it should seek testimony from the agency and stakeholders before adopting reasonable. That can go out. Because that would have been, okay.
On that note, should we put stakeholders? It should talk to the agency and stakeholders first. Or just leave it as stakeholders, or leave it as agency.
Yeah, 'cause you're right, we
Yeah.
lose the idea of stakeholders if we
We'll put it
just
in.
take
Put
that
it in
out.
I would
the-
include it. I think that's a good fix. Yeah, good change.
It's on line 81.
Yeah. So talk to the agency and stakeholders first.
Whereas Congress would say, of course, we would talk to the agency's stakeholders.
Well, good, we're only making recommendations.
I
Great
know.
minds think alike. We could get to B.
I think you could take out statutory on 82, beginning of 82.
Do you need on agency
No,
adjudication
not
there?
anymore, no.
No.
And then you take out statutory in 83.
Mm-hmm. And on agency adjudication, I think you could take that out too.
Then B, if we can get to B.
Oh, before B, can I make a comment about A? Sorry.
Sure.
And maybe my comment is more like A1, or maybe it will be the new B, who knows? I do think we should make reference to Congress taking into consideration existing regulatory schemes and regulatory rules that impact times. So for example, we have a statute that requires us to adjudicate certain cases in 120 days, but we also have other regulations that include like a 30-day and a 75-day period in that time. So basically that leaves 15 days to adjudicate these cases, which is impossible. So we never do follow the actual timelines, but it would be nice if they would consider sort of our pre-existing regulatory framework before imposing those limitations.
Would it work to, so with A, what if we started out, Patrick, what if it started out saying recognize that pre-existing statutory frameworks or special circumstances, and then it's got the EG. Does that work?
Or
Yeah, I
regulatory,
guess.
I mean, I don't know if you need special, maybe
I
regulatory.
guess regulatory, maybe.
and then-
I guess it could be statutory or regulatory technically, but either or, yeah.
yeah.
And would you say within the proposed statutory time limit, or is this something that we're considering to already been, if they're considering these factors ahead of time?
I think proposed makes sense.
Can I go to B now?
Yes,
I thought that this should start off the way C does, which is state expressly. I mean, this is not, don't yet write anything down, but it would be state expressly what should happen when agencies don't meet the time limit. In other words, do we just ignore it? Do they provide an explanation? Do they set an alternative time limit? What does Congress want to have happen when the agency doesn't meet the deadline?
That is the $100,000 question.
Agreed, and that's why I thought, that's what B should be, is that the idea that Congress should state expressly what should occur if the agency does not meet its statutory deadline. And you wouldn't have to put any specifics there, but you just say that you set deadlines, people don't make deadlines. What do you want to have happen, right? And then C says, do you get judicial review?
Can you scroll up a little bit so you can see the preview? Yeah.
So A is really, something, there's a pandemic, right? Or there's a flood or a tornado or something or other that results in you can't meet the deadline. So recognize that. Maybe you want to write into your statute that you have this deadline, except when there's an emergency or something or other. So take that into account. That's what I saw A is doing. And then B is, well, if you don't meet your deadline, what do you do? But it just sort of gave two options and wasn't clear who was supposed to decide which is which. So I just thought more broadly, Congress should state expressly what should be the result of failure to meet a deadline.
Of course, a lot of times that manifests itself in an agency losing a case, but failing to meet, deadlines as a due process. So it's, so they're already at a deficit. Whether or not Congress.
I mean, that's the point. I mean, Congress might write in the statute, in the event the deadline is not met, the agency shall proceed as expeditiously as possible to give highest priority to that case or something. I mean, in other words, just say what they want to happen. Or they could say, then, if the agency is a party to the case, they lose the case. I mean, there's a lot of different options that could happen, but just what does Congress want to happen? My sense is we hope everybody will just forget about the statutory deadline and proceed as if it wasn't there. But Congress ought to decide. If it's going to set a deadline, what does it want to have happen?
I think that is a good suggestion. And I also think, but even before that, you have to give the agency an opportunity to explain what happened, which I think is what the original intent of B was. So like the agency has to be able to provide an explanation of what happened, regardless of what like, oh, our mailroom stopped or something like that. And then I agree, then we should say, or Congress should say what happens at that point.
Well, I'm not sure about the explanation. I mean, the explanation usually is going to be, we just can't do it in that time frame. I mean, we don't have the resources. And I mean, that's nice to hear, but I don't know if that should affect what happens in that case. In other words, Congress should decide if there's not enough resources to decide these things in a timely fashion, what happens? Well, just try to do it as fast as you can. That would be an option. Set an alternative time. That's an option. But I don't know who is the agency making the explanation to.
Right. I know I feel like I'm particularly biased, working for an agency because, these are already, if Congress sets a statute, it's self-enforcing, right? And so an agency could, lose a case, or conversely, an agency could win a case if somebody doesn't file by a certain deadline, right? So maybe it goes both ways. You still have IGs, other parties that will look to see if not an agency's meeting its statutory responsibilities. The last thing an agency wants to do is do yet another report back to Congress.
Yeah, and you're thinking it's sort of an enforcement situation.
Yeah.
But think about Social Security, right? What happens if the hearing on the Social Security disability isn't concluded in time, right? Does the person get his benefits automatically? I mean, if
Right.
Congress wants to say so, yeah, fine. That's up to them to decide. I think that'd be a crazy idea, but nevertheless. So I think B should be state expressly what should occur if the agency does not meet statutory deadline.
Okay, Roxanne? Yeah, I think you're on mute.
I agree with Bill. I struggle to think what could be a possible outcome. And I also asked the same question to myself that Bill, you just asked, which is, and who are you explaining this to? And I don't, because like every agency is different. Like, for example, like you said, Social Security, okay, is the rule that the person who's applied for benefits just gets their benefits because it's too slow. Whereas my agency, the adjudication we have is between a prosecutor and two conflicting parties. It's like, we have to issue a decision. And how do you force us to issue a decision when no one's written that decision in a timely fashion? I don't know what, I mean, short of having to report on how untimely we are or something, I don't know what the stick is.
of course, realize we're talking about this is be a statutory deadline for a specific agency, all right? It's not generic. So if they set a statutory deadline for NLRB cases, right? Well, then, they might say, then set another deadline, all right? Or you have an additional 30 days or something. That might be their thing. They couldn't say who wins. But Social Security, they might. So they're always focusing on a particular agency if they're setting the deadline.
Yeah, so I like the language you've suggested to add, which is that they need to specify what's going to happen if the deadline is not met.
And if I could be a little bit cynical about it, this is another reason why Congress shouldn't do this at all, right? If we say, if you're going to do it, you really have to do these other things, and they're going to say, oh God, we don't want to do that.
Yeah, I think you're right, Bill. I mean, this was pulled, well, Ray, I'll put you slightly on the spot because I think this is actually pulled in part from the CSRA, actually. But there was an ACUS recommendation, that one from the 70s, basically says that before determining to impose statutory time limits for the conduct of agency proceedings, Congress should instead let the agency set its own timetable. It may also require that significant departure from agency adopted timetables be explained in current status reports. So I mean, even if you don't address it here, it's certainly, it's sort of addressed in an earlier recommendation. Not that you have to address it here as well, but there is certainly an earlier statement on this point.
And I
But
may
that's inconsistent with what we have above. If you go scroll up again, we say, no, a little farther. Congress should either require agencies to adopt reasonable time limits or impose such limits itself. We're giving Congress the choice there.
They're both in here. I usually won't use the chat, but I'll drop it in because it's long and you don't want me reading it all to you.
No, I'm just saying what you said is that first they should
half of
let
it.
the agency do it, and that's different from what we're saying here. I mean, we could change it to say it should first require agencies to adopt reasonable time limits before imposing such limits itself. If that's what we want to say.
And I guess just for the sake of being clear, we're only talking in the scenario where Congress requires an agency to complete an adjudication by a certain period of time, right?
Yes.
Because, when I was kind of reading this, putting on kind of an attorney hat, Congress has imposed time limits on appellants and agencies as well. So, when we think of, the VA Accountability Act or VOA or whistleblowing special counsel, I mean, there are just as many statutory limits on what an appellant needs to bring a case and file. And, so we're only talking within the realm of what happens when an agency doesn't meet its requirement. And I guess, to me, then, equitable tolling doesn't allow for an agency to miss its deadline, only for appellants. And so if you do have such a hard bar, you could imagine an agency is going to be, whether it's OPM or some other agency, is going to be prescribed to issue regulations to implement that statutory limit. And agencies are going to build in exceptions, right? To those limits. So I guess I'm just kind of struggling a little bit on what, if any, should Congress be doing when an agency isn't in conformance, because it's going to be mapped against the agency's regulatory implementation of that statute. And so it will just be kind of this ongoing fight between, Article 2 and Article 3, or Article 1, I'm sorry, between Congress and the executive branch. So I was just kind of, I'm really struggling with that concept and how would it actually apply?
I think it would have, first of all, it'd have to depend on the agency, right? Because the agencies are all different. And so whether it's enforcement or benefits or whatever. And obviously it would be a difficult decision, and Congress would have to, we're saying Congress should decide that rather than just leave it open, an open-ended question. You delete what's on lines 104 through 105, require an agency in case, delete that, because that's
Okay.
worse. Yeah. And so, I mean, yeah, what would they do? I don't know what they do. I hope they do something reasonable. But whatever it is, we should know. We should not leave it open.
Yeah, I think that's exactly
Fair
right,
point.
Bill. I mean, this is like the worst possible scenario, and you do see this in some statutes where there's a deadline, it says nothing about what happens, then you get endless litigation over what should happen. So I think the way you put it, Bill, where it's just decide what happens and make it clear in the statute, at least gets rid of the sort of endless non-productive litigation over what the statute requires. Sorry, Roxanne, I see your hands up.
Sure. So, if the purpose of this recommendation is to provide best practices for agencies to improve the timeliness of their adjudication, maybe we don't even need Section 3 at all. I mean, maybe we should just be focused on what we're telling agencies they should be doing, in terms of setting their own goals and doing this and doing that to make things better. And just leave out the whole idea of Congress stepping in and forcing agencies to do things faster.
Especially if we have another recommendation that addresses it.
I mean, one complicating factor is I think actually when Congress steps in and imposes time limits, it can actually make things worse. I think, Ray, you've sort of seen that in historically at MSPB, where one category of cases has a time limit, other categories don't. The agency is then forced to prioritize one workload over other workloads to meet those timetables, even though nobody actually desires that outcome. So you have situations like that where Congress imposing statutory deadlines is actually counterproductive from everybody's perspective, and actually worsens timeliness for other caseloads.
But Jeremy, what about Jeff's point that, is there, I don't know about these recommendations the way you guys do. Is there a prior ACUS recommendation directly addressing whether or not Congress should set statutory deadlines?
There is. It's what I quoted in the chat. I'll give you a link to the actual recommendation from 78. I think if the committee agrees with it, you could just let it stand. I guess the question is it worth revisiting anything here or letting it stand as the current opinion of the conference?
Not knowing what that recommendation says, I'm not in a position to say
You can
this is
click
an
on
improvement.
the link. It'll pop right up. It'll pop right up.
But how long is it?
Well, it's not too long.
It's not too long. And the relevant language, it's broader than just adjudication. It also goes into rules and things. The relevant language is what I've copied in. It shows up as 2 and then 4. Those 3 chat bubbles gives you the relevant language about adjudication. With, I think, one. There's another one about Congress should sort of do periodic retrospective review of these sorts of deadlines if it imposes them. And then there's one about Congress should explicitly state whether judicial review is available if an agency misses a deadline. If this just completely reflects the opinion of the committee, I think, you could either just not address it, or we could just put it in the preamble and say, this is out there. This recommendation is cast against that backdrop.
And that we're really addressing agencies in this recommendation, which the previous one didn't.
Right.
It's a great discussion. Nadine, you had your hand up there for,
Did, but I put it down. I was gonna suggest that the bubbles are there. You don't have to read the whole report, and Jeremy already did that. And I was just gonna add that I think there's value in stating this. I really like Roxanne's idea of pushing it to the end,
Yeah,
because then it's clear that we really want agencies to take the reins on this to the extent they can. And then if Congress wants to weigh in, then we've said something about that. And I without having read the prior recommendation, I acknowledge that it seemed to me from the original draft that there was a decision to kind of really emphasize that Congress should not do this. And I'm not sure that the prior recommendation went that far. I think it says ordinarily or something like that. It's not as definitive. So I do think there's value in emphasizing that Congress directly that, and we've done that before, right? We've spoken to Congress before in other recommendations. So that, you know, we really would like you to think twice. In fact, we'd like you to not do it. Make the agency do it if they haven't already.
That's what the
Yeah.
previous recommendation says. Generally, it is preferable that such limits be established by the agencies themselves rather than by statute. And
I'm just reading,
Then-
Congress ordinarily should not impose.
well, read recommendations 1 and 2 here. Before determining to impose statutory time limits, Congress should give due consideration. You know, I mean, it's
Right, but 4 says that they should not. It says ordinarily should not. So the emphasis wasn't on telling Congress not to do it at all. In fact,
except that 1, 2, and 3, or 1 and 2, put a lot of weight on Congress not doing it.
Well, and I think this recommendation from 1978 does a pretty admirable job of dealing with the issue that we were wrestling with a minute ago, which is, well, what happens if time limits are set and they aren't met? In number 7, it basically says, well, Congress should say whether that the individual claimant gets to go to court or whether these just become normative time limits that they'll need to report on as to whether or not they're meeting. I think this, I mean, I haven't taken a huge amount of time to read this recommendation other than skimming through it quickly, but I think it does a pretty darn good job. And so either maybe we cite to it as Jeremy suggested in the preamble, or we have a new last section where we say if Congress is interested in, you know, setting time limits, please refer to ACUS's recommendation from 1978 on this topic or something like that.
I like that approach, Roxanne. I'll be honest. You know, it's just a difficult time right now, I think, where people could see this so prominently displayed that it could buoy, you know, some kind of cherry picking and moving out on legislation. At least we're not saying executive order. That would be worse. But I think referring back to this report, I think it's just a better approach rather than making it feel like we're doubling down. In essence, if this could be perceived that we're saying that the earlier 1978 didn't go far enough and we're trying to add more weight to it to allow Congress to exert itself more.
I would disagree. I read the early recommendation, and I think if we started 3 by saying ordinarily Congress should not impose statutory impose deadlines on agency adjudication, and then go through what we have, because what we have in A, B, and C are all limitations on what Congress must do if it is going to impose a deadline, which is not in the 78 recommendation. I would say this is actually is a more negative approach than the 78 recommendation, which is just sort of like ordinarily you shouldn't do it, but you know, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't put any sort of tough decisions on Congress the way this one does. So I think this is a more limiting approach. But it certainly should go at the end rather than the beginning.
Nadine?
I agree with Bill, and I'll just say that if the idea, the committee agrees to just referencing the ACUS prior recommendation, I would put on my implementation hat. If my friend Hai was here, she would do that. And put a little more meat on those bones rather than just point to a prior recommendation. Agencies aren't necessarily going to go look for that. I think it's helpful to maybe lay out a little bit of what it says if we're going to lean that way. But I agree with Bill. I don't think there's harm in laying this out in the way that we have. And I think it maybe strikes out a little bit of, limiting territory that the prior recommendation, and I have not read it word for word, does.
I
So
would
if we,
say-
so if we do that, could we leave A, B, and C and then add a D that said, please see also, and then, or drop a footnote somewhere that says, please see also this recommendation from 1978. Does that make sense, Nadine
Um,
or
I
Bill?
won't speak for Nadine, but I don't think it would go as a D because it's what I would say is it's part of part of the basic thing. And that's why I would start all three by saying ordinarily Congress should not set deadlines for agency adjudication.
Would you drop the footnote from that sentence maybe?
If we can have a footnote,
We don't usually put footnotes in the recommendation.
That's
That's
So
what I
right.
thought.
we
Preamble.
do it in the preamble.
Yeah, we could do it in the preamble easily. Because there's nothing inconsistent with what we say here, what's in the preamble, what's in the 78 recommendation. So there you get the negative right up front. And then it's sort of like, but if you guys don't take our advice, then.
Can we see this for a second without the markup? Just getting a little hard to read, just for that first paragraph, thanks. Thank you, that was helpful.
Well, then you could say if Congress does decide to impose time limits in line 82. Because we've just said they ordinarily should not do it.
Although we still have the option for a statute requiring the agency to, by regulation or other means, develop its own. So maybe just if Congress thinks time limits are useful, something like that, or I mean, would be absolutely warranted
Yeah.
instead of statutory time limits.
I would, in line 81, if Congress does consider, in other words, following this, if Congress does consider imposing, take out statutory, just put in time limits, period. But it should talk to the agency and say goes first. If Congress does decide to impose time limits, it should do so only after determined benefit, blah, blah, blah. If Congress decides time limits are necessarily warranted, how about if Congress then decides time limits? It should either require agencies to adopt reasonable time limits or impose such limits itself.
Well, except there we're deviating from our previous recommendation.
You could say it should require agencies to adopt reasonable time limits or in rare circumstances or something, impose such limits itself. I think that would be closer to the previous recommendation.
Sounds good.
Okay. Good movement there. And what about A, B, and C?
I'm happy with them as they are now.
Okay.
Agreed.
And then we would cut and paste 3 and put it behind 4. So that 3 would be the new 4. Or is there, I'm sorry, maybe
We put it at the end of
at
this
the very
section.
end, yeah. I guess I didn't see how many paragraphs are there. Yeah. Okay. All right, so it'd be after 6. Is that right?
Yeah.
Would be the last one.
Mhm.
Bury the lead.
6 is about performance goals. No, yeah. Measures, oh, sorry. Maybe I'm looking at the wrong thing. Oh, that's 6, yeah, that's about ALJs.
Okay,
5 is about performance for other people.
okay.
And then 4 is about timeliness goals. Yeah, I don't know, does it go, I maybe it's committee on style if it goes all the way at the end.
No, I
Right.
think you're right. It would go after 4 because basically we'd be saying agencies, you should set your own goals. And then
Right.
we say, okay, well, Congress feels it needs to do it because it would be a little odd to have it after individual
Yeah,
employee
yeah.
performance goals.
And for the sake of not creating any more crazy red line, I'm just gonna do that afterwards, but I know we're all in agreement on that, so I'll do that after and we'll just proceed as is.
You could even have a separate section for it. I mean, make this section agency performance goals and standards, and then I don't know if that works, but
It's an idea.
it does seem to not quite follow all the fine-grained recommendations in about ALJs and non-ALJs and so forth.
I think that's not a bad idea, Jeff, to make it
Make it a special separate
title this section.
statutory. Time limits or
Like arbitrary time.
considerations for Congress.
Yeah, like considerations for Congress.
Would that be like the final?
Yeah, put it at the very,
Recommendation.
very end.
Like
It would
a
be a heading. It would be its own heading.
new header? That'd be like like after, on page 12, come at the end of the document?
Hmm.
Then it becomes sort of an if all else fails.
Pull the cord.
We'll make sure to bold it and make it red in our transmittal to the Hill. Don't worry.
I'll be interested to see what the council says.
All right,
Are we on 4 now?
I think so. All right, yeah, organizational performance goals. Maybe we'll just start with Jeff since we do have that one comment.
Oh,
I
it's,
think it's just breaking it out,
yeah, I was just breaking it up because
otherwise.
you could read it as periodically ensure, periodically encourage. But you don't want to read it.
No, that's
say
good.
that, so.
I think that's fine. Number 5. Okay, Nadine.
Thank you. I just had a question on G.
Yeah.
Which basically lines up with 4C. 4C because it's talking about it. I think it's the exact same language almost as 4C about goals.
Oh,
And so 5, I think, is really talking about expectations. We say that a lot in D, E, F, C. I think it appears in C. So all of this is about performance when you're considering the performance of employees. So I don't think goals is the right word. This is my long way of saying I don't think goals is the right word there. And the language that's replicated there is identical to what I think appears above. So evaluate such expectations. So I just wanted to identify that, and to the extent that it's meant to replicate what was above, I just flag that for you all. But other than that, I think it's
you might need to put those little numbers in there too then.
And we'll get rid of the word expectations twice. Unless you want expectations that provide clear expectations.
Nope. I have something on F.
Thank you. That's all I have.
On F, all the other encourage things to take account of things, or things that I could identify and take account of them. With F, I just don't know. Ensure expectations do not inadvertently lead employees or senior executives to decide case in a particular manner. And I know what that means. I mean, don't do something that's going to make them all grant all the cases or deny all the cases and so forth. I understand that, but what I don't understand is what expectation, how you could take account of that. And I don't know if there's some way to make it more concrete, but I mean, in E, ensure expectations take into account the range of case types and tasks performed. I can look at the cases performed and the tasks employed to do that. I can identify them, but here I just don't have a clue.
It's going to be a deal of thinking about potential unintended consequences. I mean, I think in there's lots of resources that agencies can consult. I mean, I think this is an area where agencies can learn a lot from mistakes of other agencies. I mean, would it work to say something like consider potential unintended? I mean, I'm struggling with it. I mean, there's lots of sort of sources of information here, but that's what this is about.
So I think we could simplify this whole section a little bit by just not having to refer to the senior executive service all the time. At the beginning of number 5, you could just say employees, including members of senior executive service, and then just refer to employees, because senior executive services members are employees. But so I don't think we need to have separate references to them all the way through.
It can also be inferior officers.
Or also what?
They can also be inferior officers.
They could be, you know.
We try to avoid
Yeah.
officer length for reasons that I'm sure many of you can sympathize with.
Well, I'm still, I mean, maybe there's nothing to be done, but I mean, I just don't have a clue as to how you would decide. I mean, every time you make it harder for somebody to make a decision one way, then there's a easier out by granting a denial. And so I just don't know how you take that into account. But you think, other than being aware of that, I sort of like the idea of saying, ensure expectations, or consider possible unintended consequences of expectations, period. I mean, you're identifying one unintended consequence. And maybe, okay, how about consider possible unintended consequence of expectations, including inadvertently leading employees? Inadvertently leading employees to decide case take other action. Yeah, okay. I guess I can live with that.
Great. Okay, Nadine?
This is a broader question that relates to 6 and kind of how 5 and 6 really kind of work together. I mean, 6 is almost identical to what it says in 5. And the only distinction is that we're talking about employees not subject to performance appraisals. I'm also focused, so to the extent that we want to obviously treat that category differently, we could just say they should follow what we just set out in 5. I also had a question about the difference in terminology between expectations and measures, and whether we're really talking about measures and how people are evaluated in terms of their performance, and that would apply regardless of what category we're talking about. So I don't know if that's maybe more of a style question in terms of what terminology we want to use, but when I mean, Ray could speak to this, when you're measuring performance of employees, are you looking really at expectations or actual performance metrics, right?
Yeah, they're both general and technical competencies with some thrown in results-driven activities, accomplishments. So I did kind of struggle a little bit in this section because it doesn't kind of traditionally follow kind of the HR process of performance evaluation, but it's also geared towards adjudicators. And so treating this as kind of making sure that the technical competencies are adequately reviewed and measured against is just too much HR speak, and I didn't want to kind of get lost in that. I certainly take your point.
Are there any other employees other than ALJs that this covers? I mean, it says including ALJs, but who else is not subject to performance appraisal?
Appointees.
PASs.
Appointees would be the other one. Like we left that out, but sometimes appointees put their own requirements on
They
themselves.
do,
but-
that's true.
But yes, that would be it.
I mean, politicals are supposed to be rated, but as you know, they don't get bonuses. And so
Yeah,
it's kind of sometimes a pass-through exercise. Either you show up to work the next day or you don't. But I think the universe that we're trying to capture here is pretty broad. And notwithstanding, you know, the AOJs, I know Chief Judge Nagle probably has a lot to say about how AOJs are captured under these performance. It's not so much performance ratings, but they also have goals and expectations to meet. And it's hard to maybe articulate the differences.
I mean, maybe I'm not sure we should even get into the ALJ world here. I mean, I made the same comment in number 28, where it was talking about incentive awards and kind of lumped ALJs into that paragraph, and they can't get incentive awards. I'm just wondering, it really complicates things by trying to bring in the ALJ world into this.
Well,
You lose anything by not addressing it at all. I mean, so I can tell you the way we structured it is, I think if you go up 5 begins with when, with the expectation that by law agencies do actually evaluate performance, and 6
Right.
begins if, trying to get this idea that maybe this committee, ACUS, doesn't want to take a stance on whether agencies should do this or should not do it. But if agencies do this, there's at least certain minimum things that you better abide by. Or of course, the conference can just not address it at all. But we know this is obviously of great interest to lots of people.
And you could literally just say, like I said earlier, I think you could just say they should follow the recommendations above. I'm not sure that
To the extent feasible.
Obviously, where you talk about incentives or discipline, that wouldn't apply. That's the critical difference between performance appraisal and performance goals, or whatever you want to call them in 6.
Expectations would be great if we could use that word.
Thank you, Judge.
I mean, in our earlier ALJ adjudicator recommendation 92.7, ACUS said that chief ALJs should be given the authority to conduct regular ALJ performance reviews based on relevant factors, including case processing guidelines, judicial comportment and demeanor, and the existence of, if any, of a clear disregard, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you know, so we addressed it in a different way in 92.7. We didn't try to sort of map the sort of a performance appraisal system onto ALJs. We said chief ALJ should do it. I don't know if that's still a good idea, but I just think either we should be very perfunctory about this the way Nadine suggested it, or we should try to, and it also kind of makes the recommendation a lot, this is a long recommendation, and it would be shorter if we can get rid of this paragraph.
I mean, one option is just to say this recommendation does not address this issue. Just carve it off completely. I mean, that's one way to take no stance. I mean, I think if you just leave it with silence, it begs the question of what about ALJs? Because obviously,
see ACUS 92-7.
Well, but come on, how can we address timeliness of adjudications and not address ALJs? I mean,
Well, they're exempt from performance appraisal.
so what? That doesn't mean the agency can't adopt regulations that govern procedures under which they operate.
Right, so then
And those procedures might make differences in how long it takes to do things.
So this paragraph just substitutes measures for
and it takes out language about discipline and incentives. I mean, I think that's a critical difference. Maybe
Yeah.
it's merged the way this is currently written, but that's why it's broken out as 2 separate things. That this makes no mention of discipline or incentives.
okay.
I mean, I certainly think you should not carve ALJs out. I mean, they're a critical part of the administrative adjudicatory system, and therefore we can't just carve them out. And the answer is, how can we deal with timeliness issues with ALJs? And the answer is by not dealing with them as individuals, but by dealing with them in terms of regulations and policies that are generally applicable to the proceedings that they engage in. And that's what I think 6 tries to do. And therefore, I might wordsmith a couple of them for something, but I think the concept is entirely appropriate.
Well, and getting back to our earlier discussion about data collection, the primary way that we do it at Social Security with our 1,500 judges is through, creating, benchmarks for timeliness, for adjudicating or for moving certain cases through certain parts of the process.
How about benchmarks instead of measures?
Yeah. And we try to isolate it and narrow it down to things that are solely within the ALJ's control, so that it's not a staff-related issue or someone else's, interactions. We're only holding them accountable for the cases during the time when the cases are in their control, and the case waits for them to make a step before it moves forward.
That's done by the chief ALJ, right? It's not the agency separate from the chief ALJ, is it?
No, it's me.
It's you, but I'm sorry, but you're the chief ALJ, right?
No, the head of
That's right.
the office.
That's right.
Are you the chief ALJ or the head of the Office of Hearings and Appeals, or whatever it's called now? Or both?
Yeah, I mean, I sent out the benchmarks for the judges and I'm the one who enforces and at least directs my other management judges. We have a structure because we have so many judges. But I have delegated the authority to people below me who are management judges to engage in certain parts of that process as well. But ultimately, if it comes to if God forbid it became down to a discipline issue, then I would be involved at that point.
Well, Bill persuaded me that we should leave this in, I guess, but.
I mean, do you explain again? I'm sorry, Ray, if I'm talking out of turn, the distinction. Can we not say they should follow 5? Is there something in 5? I think you're trying to say there's something in 5 that we wouldn't.
Well, and Jeremy touched upon that as far as incentives and, the requirements under chapter 43. So I think 5 is the broader one where they do talk about incentives and discipline, I think. Or informing.
I don't see it in the list, but I
think it's the word penalized for I forget if we
Penalized.
include that, but
oh, there it is. Yep.
I mean, partly is we had
Take out senior
a section
executive.
later down about public disclosure, which Jeff, I know you spotted earlier. In the earlier draft, these were sort of all together and we tried to separate them out. So maybe it's not quite as distinct now.
Yeah.
But there has to be this idea that like discipline and incentives look different for all employees who are not ALJs versus ALJs. That's the critical difference. And that's, I think, where that's the meat of this.
Well, what if we just said, not in paragraph 5, accepting, the part relating to penalties or whatever, accepting D, or, I mean.
I wouldn't want to give the impression, and I don't know if we have it on, maybe Judge Strother, you could speak to this if you're on the call, but like, you don't want to give the impression, I think, that we're talking about implementing a system of performance appraisal for ALJs, just calling it by some other name. I think separating it out, there's some utility in that to say, look, we're not talking about setting up a performance appraisal system that for some reason we're not calling a performance appraisal system. There might be some benefit legally and institutionally for separating them out.
Unmute. I'm here. This is Judge Strother. I was distracted by something. What was the question?
So in paragraph 5, we talk, I mean, this will be an issue near and dear to your heart, I think. But in 5, we talk about performance evaluation for employees except for ALJs. And in 6, we talk about establishing benchmarks for ALJs.
Yeah.
And
I noticed that. I don't have any strong feelings.
Okay.
I'm a chief judge. I'm not as against evaluating ALJs as line judges might be. And I certainly work for Social Security, where we were subject to certain benchmarks and all. We'll probably know more after the Supreme Court rules of Jarkessi.
Can I ask what I mean, obviously, Ray could probably speak to this too. Employees and senior exec, any employees that you could be penalized, right? If, I guess, I'm trying to understand what we mean by that term as it relates to judges. Are there not consequences from missing benchmarks?
I might defer to Jeff and Ray because it's the MSPB's own case law sort of on this, but certainly for an employee, as I understand it, if I don't meet some sort of benchmark, I mean, I'm subject pretty immediately to a disciplinary action, whereas that doesn't happen for, like, I'd have to independently go before the MSPB and convince the MSPB that some sort of failure to meet certain expectations provides good cause for discipline. It's just a different process, and it's not an automatic penalty because I didn't meet a numerical quota I'm now subject to discipline. There's a sort of
I'm,
independent.
I'm hung up on penalized versus discipline. Like, there's all sorts of ways you could be penalized,
Right.
right? But I just didn't know if there were consequences short of discipline associated with missing. Does that make sense?
Right. I think that the two, kind of dividing lines is around chapter 43, right, for all employees. And ALJ is not subject to 43. So that's kind of one way we may wanted to distinguish the two groups. Now, when it comes to the term of art of penalized versus disciplined, of course, ALJs could be disciplined. Of course, SCSers are disciplined, et cetera. I don't know, Jeremy, if you'd have a strong opinion on swapping out the word penalized versus disciplined. Because, penalized isn't used often when it comes to employee accountability. Discipline certainly is. And that may just help, keep it at a more readable level. And maybe folks aren't maybe reading more into the term penalized versus disciplined, because of course ALJs can be disciplined. They're, disciplined all the time. Including members of the SCS. It's just that procedurally they happen under different parts of the statute or regulations. And we're kind of focusing on 43, which captures most of the federal government, but not all. And I think I think there are pros and cons of either grouping them all together or separating them out. But I think on balance, I do agree. I think separating them out for some of the institutional concerns that Jeremy highlighted, and even potentially with ongoing Supreme Court litigation, separating them out makes sense. Even though all in all, it does read pretty similar.
So did we decide to refer to the recommendations in paragraph 5, or are we going to list all these things out again? I'm not sure that we had a consensus there.
You see, one difference here is in C, where it just says, ensure measures reflect tasks in the control of individual employees, and makes no reference to penalty or now discipline. I mean, that was sort of where we tried to draw this distinction, that they should be reasonable, but not getting into the sort of consequences of.
Then you've highlighted that, Jeremy, and I missed that when I read this. I missed that distinction.
Yeah. But I mean, that's important. I mean, if it's a distinction that we think is really important, maybe if that's too submerged, but I mean, that's
why I think Jeff had an idea to kind of build it into that line on 149 that we have there now, so somehow carve it out, or I don't know. I'm not sure if he had language for that.
Oh.
Are you thinking something at the end like, except as relates to discipline and incentives, I don't know, which are prohibited by law or something like that?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Because
Well, can I throw out another possible way of combining them? What if we combined everything into how it's phrased in 6? And so the heading would be, when agencies consider timeliness or productivity in appraising the performance of employees as defined in 5 USC 4301, comma, members of the senior executive service, comma, or administrative law judges who are not subject to performance appraisals, they should, and then we include all the sub points from 6, which are more generic and don't refer to penalizing and things like that. Because we're not trying to lay out in full explanation, how you should evaluate the performance of all your employees. We're just saying, here are some things you should think about in setting your standards for people. Is that a way we could combine it by making it all slightly more generic.
You have to do something with D though now.
And the header that talks about appraising the performance of employees who are not subject to performance appraisal.
Yeah, I thought I'd put that, maybe we'd put that all in the opening heading.
Yeah, I think Roxanne is suggesting we do combine all of the, the groups under 5.
Yeah.
I think
Into
you
six.
with
have
the
to say,
expectations.
so after senior executive service, you have to be comma or
Setting benchmarks,
setting benchmarks for, right.
which was Judge Nagel's suggestion,
Hmm.
I think, if I'm remembering.
Or expectations, but I think that works either way.
That's right.
So we'd be trying to just combine them all by making them all slightly less specific or punitive or whatever.
So D is still a slightly awkward fit there because we were talking about discipline for circumstances beyond their control. That's a little off for ALJs, but it's maybe
You would just
I
take
would,
it out,
I
right?
would ignore I'd get rid of A through G from 5, and I would just apply everything in 6 to everybody.
oh, I see.
Because then you've got C, which just says ensure that the measures reflect tasks within their control. Well, that would apply to everybody.
Well, I see what you're doing. That's a good idea.
One also difference I don't think has been flagged is that that 6 does reference decisional independence.
Okay.
So I don't know if we want that within E.
6E.
Well, I guess, for 6E, we could say ensure expectations do not inadvertently lead employees who decide cases to decide them in a particular way. That would just to make it generic. Because then it would also apply to AJs,
Mhm.
who aren't administrative law judges.
The one thing that makes me a little hesitant though is if we're talking about performance appraisal of, say, like investigators who contribute to the larger adjudicative system, that's slightly different than like recognizing preserving the decisional independence of adjudicators, whether it be AJs or ALJs. But I'll defer to the committee on that.
And if you leave it with just 2, as we had it before, it has a thing at the end, including any decisional independence requirements, which basically would apply to AJs, but not investigators, assuming some independent body of law. So would that work, Jen? If it's just 2, it goes back to 2?
Yeah.
We just refer to decisional independence requirements from some other authority.
Yeah, that's fine. I think decisional independence is worth. Yeah.
So what change would that make right here? And where?
I think it's just reverting back to 2 instead of who. On line 161.
Yeah, I was just gonna have that. I was just suggesting that say who decide cases to decide them in a particular way. Just so that it would be clear we're only talking about people amongst the many people that we're setting measures for. If we've got employees who decide cases, we don't want to inadvertently.
Oh, I see. So it would be employees who decide cases to decide them in a particular way. And then you have to say, because I think the second category is take actions that would adversely affect. That's, Jen, where you're saying it could be investigators, it could be non-adjudicative staff. So you need to like inadvertently lead employees who decide cases, decide them in a particular way, or you have to say like inadvertently lead employees to take other actions, because it wouldn't just be employees who decide cases for that second part. It could be a broader set of employees.
I guess you could start this sentence for E, if you're trying to get everybody in one bucket. If you, maybe you start E by saying, for employees who decide cases, and then just say, ensure expectations do not blah, 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 and then go from there. So it's clear that E is really only applying to.
And then have a new F that says, for all employees, ensure expectations do not lead them to take actions that would adversely affect decisional quality. Because that might include, you know, I don't know, Nadine, in your case, an OSHA prosecutor taking shortcuts to like improve timeliness, where that wouldn't be the adjudicator, but it's someone else in the control of an agency who would be involved in, who might be subject to these expectations.
Yeah,
I think it's a good idea to break it apart.
yeah, they feel like different things to me.
And I do think this, Roxanne, I think this is a great idea to try to actually think it's a nice way to tuck in the ALJs without highlighting them, frankly.
Do you still need including any decisional independence requirements?
I need some help here. Okay, so what are we doing in E, and then what are we doing in the new F?
So if, as I understand it, and Roxanne, Nadine, please correct me if I'm getting this wrong, it'd be for employees who decide cases, ensure expectations do not inadvertently lead them to decide cases in a particular way. Colon space new F, for all employees, ensure expectations do not inadvertently lead them to take actions that would adversely affect the rest of what's currently in E.
One more time on the new F.
For all employees, ensure expectations do not inadvertently lead them. And then you have the rest right there. 2, yep.
I'm sorry, I would till the
What?
finishes.
Do you need it, decisional independence requirements then?
I think we need to delete that.
Yeah.
Because we're kind of morphing into a Lucia issue as far as independence. You know, is it the agency head making the decision, or, you know, is that an inferior officer could do it? And so independence, I think it's just a tricky word right now. And I think we're trying to make sure that the fairness and integrity of the proceedings is absolutely a strong value we want to continue to see. But if we're kind of combining AJs and ALJs and all these decision makers, in which inferior officers are still being litigated against, and part of it's based on independence, it's kind of just a bad term of art to use right now. So I think we just delete it and just leave a period after proceedings.
Semicolon or period. Yeah.
Or yeah, I'm sorry, yeah.
Is it semicolon or period? Semicolon.
Yeah. So I think decisional quality, fairness, integrity, that is consistent with independence, but I think the term independence, it could be a trigger word. That we don't want to kind of get thrown in the middle of a debate over.
Yeah,
That works for me. I think you're on the right track. It's pretty fluffy.
Yeah.
But, you know, fairness, all that stuff, that's really decisional independence, I think.
Yeah.
I was thinking that, like, if you had an investigator, I mean, we just say inadvertently decide something or find something a certain way. I mean, we may want them to inadvertently do something, you know? Like, we want investigators, we want ALJs for that matter, to apply the policies of the agency. I think we've got it. I think it inadvertently expresses what we want, and the other part, you know, carries it. You know, we want procedural fairness, to be biased, to just do what the complainant that the agency wanted done would not be fair.
We made a lot of changes to this one, so I just want to show a simple markup and make sure we're not missing anything.
Yeah.
I can. Yep, okay. So this is how the new 5, which combines 6, will read. And I just want to make sure everybody's good with it.
I was just gonna flag that I think we have a mix now of expectations and measures, and maybe that's fine, but Committee on Style will reconcile, I know, it's flagging that.
And we like measures, right, as the neutral term that would apply for performance appraisal and non-performance appraisal.
Yeah, I think that works better.
Okay.
Thank you, Leah.
On line 110 or in setting benchmarks. So it's a print, yeah.
I think it works.
Is there a G? Okay.
Should we say measures instead of goals?
Yeah, measures. Yeah. Yeah.
Looks good.
I mean, we do repeat the at the end of 5, affected quality, fairness, integrity of the proceedings, and we say that again in G. It's just, I don't know if that's.
I think that's okay,
That's
though.
okay.
I think in F, we're saying,
For all employees, yeah, versus periodically evaluate.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Could just say periodically reevaluate such measures.
Yeah.
You want to say performance measures? I know it's already in the performance section. Okay, good enough. All right. All right. Very useful. All right, here we go. 174. Nadine.
I just wanted to identify on 176 that we say should consider. I didn't know if, I know the chair is really trying to ensure that we use should. This is telling agencies to look at the other recommendations, and I think we want them to use them, not to consider using them, but.
An agency should use.
And we have it in appropriate circumstances there as a little bit of a hedge. So I think that's the better, yeah.
Thank you, Nadine.
That's going in my performance evaluation.
Good stuff. All right. I think 179, heading that paragraph. Looking for hands. Nadine, do you see another one?
On new 7, I'm working old school hard copy here, so it's my 8, but it's new 7. I would suggest saying as appropriate, agencies should, rather than
If appropriate.
I would say as appropriate. Should adopt procedures. And then I couldn't follow the rest of the sentence, and I should adopt procedures for resolving multiple cases such as
aggregating similar claims.
Or consolidating.
Well, I think the recommendation talks about aggregating, doesn't it, Jane?
Yeah, there's an earlier recommendation on aggregation of claims.
Oh,
I would say just such as aggregating, because we
Okay.
say efficiently resolving after that.
Yeah, and I couldn't follow. So should adopt procedures for resolving multiple cases or efficiently resolving? I
There's-
just couldn't,
there's
I couldn't
two
follow all
ideas
the
here.
phrases. Yeah.
There's some mechanisms for definitively resolving multiple cases in a single proceeding. There's other mechanisms for, say, we're going to decide this one recurring issue, and then in the future we'll apply it as precedent, or we're establishing a rule that will decide this case going forward. So if the issue ever comes up again, we can just efficiently resolve it. So it's
Okay.
sort of two, maybe these should be separate, but it's the idea that like the aggregation is cases A, B, C, and D in a single proceeding. I resolve them all at once. In the second, we're saying, okay, there's an issue we know comes up a lot. In A, I'm going to issue a precedential decision, and then I can just rely on that as precedent in B, C, and D, or I will issue a rule that definitively resolves some legal issue, and then I can rely on that in the future.
So
This
can I,
this may be helped if you put a little number here for such as one aggregating, or little I aggregating similar claims, or 2I efficiently resolving blah, blah, blah.
I think you would do 4I resolving multiple cases in a single proceeding, such as the aggregation of similar claims, or
Yeah.
and do we need efficiently? I mean,
no,
would that apply equally to the first?
you shouldn't do this inefficiently.
Right. That helps me a great deal. Thank you.
All right, we're good on the new 7. Should go to 8.
I'll just say I'm keeping my hand up for 8, just because I
Okay.
had the same sort of problem tracking processes for screening. And then is it identifying cases? Because we have a semicolon for screening cases at intake, identifying cases. I just couldn't reconcile all of it.
2I or 1, or whatever you want to use, resolve procedural issues as early as possible. 2, identify cases. 3, identify cases. So
Okay,
after,
thank you. I just couldn't follow it.
yeah, no, that's helpful. Basically,
And
screening
somebody
is
may have
before
to
lots
check
of.
the references paragraphs 7 and 8 to make sure they're still accurate, but that's, I guess, committee on style.
Got it. Are we good for number 9? Thanks, Leah. All right, going back to 9, any questions on 9? Okay, 10, Jeff, we should add operational goals to that. I think that makes sense.
Purely style.
Does that look okay to everyone? Okay. Thanks, Leah. 11. Oh yeah, we talked about AI a little bit earlier in the new executive order. I think, yeah, maybe in that paragraph 9 at the bottom of that recommendation, we have to update, of course. Do we want to say anything else about AI? You think this is? I know we had a good chat about this at our last meeting. Okay, not seeing any hands. Okay, we'll keep it going. The new 12 agencies should outsource non-discretionary tasks. We talked a little bit about this at the last meeting. I think we broke a couple paragraphs off up last time, so I think that looks good. Okay, anything on 13? I don't think we, on 216, I don't think we changed the numbering on paragraph 2, so I think we're still good on paragraphs 1 and 2. Headquarters field. Okay. And I see Leah's kind of just double checking the ordering of the paragraphs. Nadine.
I'm going to jump to new 15. I didn't know if we were there yet, but
No, let's go there.
I just didn't know if external facing was necessary there. I assume we mean agency websites, which are obviously, unless we mean it in terms of their ECMS systems, may not be external facing. But I didn't know if we needed that language. That was the only.
Well, we tend to call them our public website versus our intranet, so we'd use the term public website. That might.
I like it.
Okay, are we to strategic planning?
Just seemed like there was a word missing there.
Yeah, you're right, Jeff.
Thanks, Leah.
I actually read that as future, anticipate future and address ongoing. So it's future concerns. Was that what it was meant to be?
That's what it was meant to be, I think, but.
So we could say anticipate future concerns and address ongoing ones. Or something like that. It's clear we're talking about the same thing there.
You just say future and
Future
ongoing
concern and
take out address.
yeah, I was thinking to anticipate
I see.
future concerns and address ongoing ones.
Okay.
Something like that. There's probably a better way to say that, but
Yeah.
I also didn't know if we needed a comma after evidence-based, but now we're really getting granular. Sorry.
But no, you don't.
Or just ongoing issues. We go back and swap them out.
I'll defer to the committee on style on this one.
Yeah. Okay, Nadine.
I don't know if we may have used this terminology earlier and I didn't do a search for it, but case receipts. Do we mean volume? That I think we mean cases coming in, right? Cases that are received. Intake or volume or something like that. Case intake. Yeah. I just kind of stopped at that word.
I think we've used intake previous, like in previous paragraphs.
Right, we'll do that.
We used it once.
All right, good. Yep, we only used that once, so yeah, we'll be consistent with intake. Yeah, I'll note for the group, we have about 8 minutes left. So we did reserve a time if we need to go over, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time.
Well, I definitely have to leave at 4, I'm sorry, but I only have one more comment, I think, which is
Okay.
at very end.
Let's go to that, just so we could capture it.
Um, So we should conform the language, I guess, to the earlier change we made about ALJ is not subject to performance appraisal.
Yeah.
And,
Can we give that to the committee? On style?
yeah, but the other point is that these ALJs are also not allowed to get incentive awards.
Right.
As you know, since you were head of the ALJ office at OPM, Ray.
That was years ago. Who knows? We hire them very differently nowadays. But yeah, they're still not subject to performance awards.
So I don't have a specific cure for this,
Well,
unfortunately.
could we, in that last sentence, could we say whether the employees would be eligible for incentive awards or subject to disciplinary actions?
I don't know, maybe we just stick with incentive awards. Because you could still, failure to perform is different from a performance-based action. So AOJs could be disciplined for failure to perform. But that kind of gets us into another world, but Jeff, were we primarily focused on incentive awards here?
Yeah, that's,
Appraisals. Yeah.
I mean,
So, Ray, are you
they're
saying
also not,
right after awards?
I mean, we have such appraisals there, but we've previously said that the ALJs are not subject to appraisals.
Right,
So,
right.
So Ray, are you suggesting just take that last part of the sentence out after the word awards?
Yeah. Thanks, Roxanne. Yeah.
And that makes sense to me. Let's focus on the positive.
Jeff, we could always say whether employees other than ALJs or something. We can, if you're okay with that, we can play with that and get that idea, make sure that's clear.
yeah, and make sure it's consistent with the previous
Yep.
thing we did about this. But I mean, you could maybe even say employees not subject to performance appraisal or
Right.
eligible for incentive awards. But yeah, it's.
Well, I think thanks for capturing that. I think let's just do maybe Jeremy and Jim, we could do a quick wrap up right now. We do save, I think we have another save the date for this committee to come back together to do an official vote. And I think maybe we just need a little bit more time to review the preceding page or recommendations we didn't get a chance to maybe go through right now. Would you recommend we come back at a later time for a shortened period of time to do one more review and a vote, or
We could do
do this on email, or
we
thoughts?
can do what you just did for you, I think, Nadine. That might work well here as well. So why don't we clean this up, circulate a draft? We have next week, same time reserved.
Yeah.
which we certainly can use, but we can circulate a draft. If nobody has any substantive comments or believes we need to meet again to debate, we can just cancel that meeting. But that will give you time to review. So we can take an email vote that way. If somebody wants a meeting, we can then discuss at the third meeting a week from today.
And you'll make that clear in the instructions when you send this out?
Yep.
Okay. I know things won't become final until we get to the end of the year conference. Is that when we do the official vote, Jeremy?
That's when the conference will vote to adopt.
adopt.
This is really just to report out of committee, if you want to use congressional language. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, again, being a rookie at this, I just want to make sure I'm following the right rules and appreciate your guidance on all this. All right, well, if it's okay, let's just wrap up right now. I want to thank everybody for jumping in on this. It's obviously, it's a critically important document and we made it so much better today. So thank you all for jumping in. And Leah, again, you're amazing. I don't know how you're able to listen to us and transcribe and make this all look great. So thank you so much for your work and your professionalism and mostly patience in dealing with us. So thank you. All right, so stay tuned. We're going to get some more instructions from Jeremy and the team, but I'm really liking where this is going, and you know, we'll see where it goes from here. But thank you guys for everybody, and got one more minute till your 4 o'clock meeting. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ray, and everybody.
Thanks.